Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. We appreciate everybody joining as you enter the Zoom room. We will begin in just about a minute or two. Thanks for joining. Hello, everybody, and here we go. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. As you join our webinar room, we will get started in just a moment. Welcome to Navigating Now, virtual roundtable series. Welcome, 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 everybody. As you join the Zoom room, welcome to this week's Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. We will begin in just a moment. We also want to thank our attendees from LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, let's get started. We want to welcome everybody to this week's Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. We are live every Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and I want to thank our community joining us via the Zoom room, those who have registered. We really appreciate you joining us today at the table. I also want to thank our community in LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for joining us live on those respective broadcasts. A few housekeeping items here today. We'll begin momentarily. Your lines will be muted throughout the call. We do really encourage questions throughout. We've got a lot of great content to cover today, but these sessions always are better with your comments and your questions for our speakers. So please submit your questions via chat box throughout, and we'll save about 10 minutes towards the end to answer Q&A. So again, thank you all to our community joining us today via Zoom and LinkedIn, and let's dive into it. So today kicks off a new month, a new series for us in June, and the topic is all about resilience. And we really couldn't have picked a better topic, as of course we are navigating some challenging times today. Today we have a guest that will help us unpack this topic of resilience, someone who plays not only in this space, but also many others around wellness and personal well-being. And I am so thrilled and honored to have Katie Bellamy join us today as our guest. Katie is a coach. She is a therapist. She's a Reiki Master. And wow, she just dabbles in so many extremely relevant topics today. And she's going to help us all really understand the concept of resilience and how we can bring a little bit of that to our day-to-day. So Katie, thank you so much for joining as we get set up here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be joining this conversation. And this was really good self-accountability and some practice for me to tap into some of my own resilience this week. So I would love to start off with sharing a little bit about me, and then if we could maybe practice some resilience and tap into our breath and our body. So as you mentioned, I'm a therapist, I'm a coach, Reiki Master. How I kind of summarize all of these things that I do, my passion is really connecting to the mind, body, spirit, promoting well-being, and showing up holistically and healing holistically.
That is wonderful. Yeah. And all concepts that I'm really looking forward to unpacking today with our folks. You mentioned taking us through an exercise, and we are all about creating the space for us to take a pause, even if it's in the middle of a really busy day. And I know that we've got a handful of folks who've joined us via Zoom, registered early. And I know that we're in the middle of a really, really busy and at times very intense week today. So very, very timely. Why don't we create the space for a little bit of an exercise? And I believe it's going to be around breath work. Katie and I have not rehearsed this. So by design, I don't know what's coming, but I will definitely stay open, and we'll welcome your facilitation here for the next moment or two. And we absolutely welcome everybody else who has joined us either live or in the Zoom room to participate as well. So Katie, please take us through.
Lovely. So however you're showing up today, whether you're walking around or running around or seated, if you could take a moment of pause, we'll only do so for a few minutes. So go ahead, however you are. If you're seated, if it feels comfortable and safe, go ahead and close your eyes. If that's not okay, gaze downward at the floor. And take a minute to just adjust your body so that you're a little bit more upright and open than you had been previously. And now place your right hand on your chest, left hand on your belly. And before adjusting your breath, just take a moment to notice it. Feel the rise and fall of your inhale and exhale. Feel your breath moving your body, your hands moving up and down, gliding along your breath. And practice noticing without judgment. There's no right or wrong. We're tuning in. Maybe there's tension, buzzing, openness. And now let's adjust our breath, inhaling through your nose, breathing in, holding here, exhale through your mouth. Again, holding, inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Repeat this flow on your own time, feeling your breath breathing you, following your inhale and your exhale, settling, maybe inviting some intention here. An intention of openness, of grounding, of centering. And letting your breath return to its natural pace. Become aware of any shifts that may have taken place. And sending yourself some gratitude and compassion. Go ahead and slowly drop your hands. Slowly open your eyes, coming back into the space. Thank you.
That was wonderful. And how often do we take just a couple of minutes to pause throughout our day? I know we say that so often, but that was what, 2-3 minutes, maybe max?
Yeah.
That was great. Yeah. I mean, I can even feel my own, energy as we start this call. It's a lot different than 4 minutes ago when we started.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Just to speak to kind of that
go ahead.
energy a little bit.
Mhm.
I know, I think oftentimes, and definitely this week, I have become more aware of just how often we're running in that fight flight, that urgency, there's always something to get done. And taking that moment of pause to recuperate, to center, and it actually helps us become more efficient.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So I have a couple specific questions that might have,
Yeah.
gone through folks' head at minds as they were going through this exercise. Oftentimes when we do breath work, we're asked to put our hand on our chest and our belly. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, with my dance movement therapy background, so my background is in clinical work. It's just like any normal talk therapist, but it's the specialty of using the mind, body, spirit connection in therapy and in healing. So from that perspective, for me, what I really like about placing some hands is one, some body boundaries. So oftentimes when we're feeling overwhelmed or when we're in our fight flight response, we kind of lose a sense of ourself, right? Like we have those phrases, I'm all over the place, or I got to get myself together. So placing that is a nice reminder of I'm here, I'm safe, my body is safe, some grounding. And I think it's also, if we, especially if we're beginners with breath work and trying to become aware and become in tune, it's nice to kind of feel, I really like that phrase, your breath breathing you, right? So you can
That
kind
was
of
my next
notice.
question.
Yeah, the notice, the inhale. That I wish I could take credit for. I heard it on a meditation on Insight Timer, and I was like, "Oh, this is good." Yeah, letting your breath kind of empower and take control in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how throughout the day we move in so many different directions, and oftentimes we're taught to get up and take some steps. So I know a lot of people are counting steps, and we have stand desks here in the office. But how often throughout the day, or even a typical week, are you placing your hand on your chest or your heart? There's something that is so different about that feeling. It's very personal, right? So you talk about boundaries. That's often a very kind of has almost a negative connotation, but there's a very positive feeling too that's elicited from placing your hand on your heart. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And in terms of how often, I would say it depends on how well I'm doing in my self-care
How in
practice,
tune you are.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that certainly, we are all in a process of learning. So that certainly varies in terms of how grounded I am in my own self-care practice.
Yeah.
With boundaries, I like to remind folks that boundaries, oftentimes when we hear that, we think like, what are we saying no to? But boundaries are also about what are we saying yes to? So sometimes we get stuck because our boundaries are too rigid, where our walls are built up, they're brick walls and they're never coming down. And then sometimes we get stuck because our boundaries are too porous. We're letting way too much come in or flow out. Boundaries are really, it's more dynamic, right? They can shift, they can change. And then in terms of our body boundaries, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of like weighted blankets for anxiety or, that comfort that can come. And just to bring in some of the Reiki philosophy, our heart chakra, this energy center that's here, this is all about connection and love. And what are we open to giving and receiving? So I think also that touching that and kind of activating that, this comes up when I'm working with clients and they're sharing something really meaningful. And sometimes my response is just it's an automatic, that's my response.
Yes.
Oh, wow, I'm feeling that here.
Yes.
Or if I'm anxious, taking a little, okay, this can be a simple and powerful reminder.
It's wonderful. It's really cool to learn a little bit about the anatomy of breathwork. It's just so interesting how, and I'm so excited about how breathwork has really made its way into the mainstream. And it's on the tail end of, I think, a meditation phenomena as well, too. Yeah. I know in my own personal practice, it was not until I understood and met my breath through breathwork practice that I really understood meditation. So do you have some thoughts on how those two are connected or how they can play off of each other?
Sure. In my practice, I encounter a lot of people who kind of have this mentality of, I know I should be meditating, or I hear that it's good, but it's just not for me, or I can't get there. So I like to remind folks that meditation is one way of practicing breathing and one way of practicing mindfulness, but we can also be mindful if we're not ready to meditate or in other ways, right? So we can be brushing our teeth mindfully. We can be getting dressed mindfully. We can be taking a walk mindfully, or we can be doing those things on autopilot and without mindfulness. So, I think starting with the breath, it's something that we all know how to do, right? It's something that we all need to do. So simply kind of turning up our intention and our focus on it can be a really good first step into, and maybe eventually getting to being able to meditate.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about let's talk a little bit about resilience. That's the topic for today. And I want to thank you for the exercise that you just took us through. Again, I feel like the energy has completely even shifted in this discussion, and how powerful a tool, right, our breath can be to set ourselves to connect with others. And I feel more connected to you. I feel more connected to, the group that has joined us. So I maybe want to come back to breathwork and how we could potentially bring that into our day-to-day, even into our professional lives, because I think, there might be some boundaries there that people might want to explore in terms of bringing, breath into the breathwork into the office space. But I want to start with this concept of resilience. And I want to ask you throughout the episode kind of three questions. The first one is, what does resilience mean to you? The second one would be, what does it mean to your practice, and how does it show up with your clients? And then the third question will be, what has maybe changed about this concept for you over even the course of the last few weeks? And I'll tee these up throughout the episode, but I want to give you the heads up that these are maybe the three themes or the three threads that we'll pull through to help our audience unpack this concept of resilience. So why don't we start with resilience and what it means to you?
Sure. So I love that you're doing ongoing series on resilience because, there might not be one, definition of it. And I think the definition can be changing. So for me personally, what I think of when I think of resilience is bouncing back. So it's actually a similar image that comes to mind for resilience and boundaries, which is that of a rubber band, right? We get stretched and then we can come back, we bounce back, versus getting stretched and breaking. So that's sort of my short, concise definition of what resilience looks like. It's our ability to go through challenges, to be stretched to our limits, and then come back and also be safe and grounded and grow from that experience.
Yeah, no, and I like the analogy. Where does resilience typically come in the conversation? Does it always involve some sort of hardship or trauma, or are there maybe other ways that resilience shows up?
So I would say it's on a continuum, right? Yeah. So sometimes we can be resilient and coming back from and healing from something more severe like trauma. We can also practice resilience maybe on something smaller like a challenge. However, in my view of it, in order to be resilient, we do have to be somewhere on that continuum of difficulty. I was looking up, I was trying to find this podcast, this source, and I couldn't find it. So if anybody knows, you can drop it in the chat. But I heard on a podcast this study of putting trees in like the ideal environment for them to grow. And they ended up dying. And what they found was that it was the wind that pushed the trees around and challenged the trees that made them develop this inner core, this stress wood that kept them strong and resilient. So in order to be resilient, we do need to be going through some sort of, whether it's a small challenge or difficulty or more significant trauma.
And some would argue we're always on that continuum, right? I think that's maybe where I was going with this was, I think the term resilience often comes up in the middle of, the height of some sort of event, or, I mean, it's obviously shown up a lot in the last few weeks, in the last few months.
Yeah.
But the practice of resilience is something that happens every day, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say it's what we are doing every day that can help us in that bouncing back, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, I don't know that we know resilience is taking place until maybe it's a hindsight sort of thing, right? Like, oh, I know I'm resilient because X, Y, and Z happened. And yet we can be proactive and preventive and work on these self-care and coping skills, connecting with our body, connecting with our supports, being in tune with our emotions. All of these are daily practices that will help us be able to bounce back
Mm-hmm.
after a challenge.
That's cool. So how does, I mean, what I'm so interested in, and again, we're going to kind of move from maybe theme to theme to theme here,
Sure.
because I think a lot of this stuff is very connected. Even the opening exercise, breath work, kind of finding your center. I mean, that's at the core of this pliability, right? As humans, right? To be able to stretch and to come back to center, and stretch and come back to center. And I know for so many, that is what some of these practices, meditation and breathwork, are all about, is coming back to center. It's the ability for you to go out in the world every day, and especially recently with everything that's been going on, to be able to find a way back to your center, and your breath or your mind being the anchor. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that you do as a practitioner. Breathwork's one of them. I know that you work with clients on an individual basis. But there's some alternative modalities that you bring to your practice as well, too, that might play into this idea of resilience. You're a Reiki master.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that our audience understands what that means. And I think it maybe runs alongside, or is very connected to things like breath work. So tell us a little bit about Reiki. Tell us about how that, comes into your practice. And if you could maybe make a tie to the type of work that you do in Reiki, and the building of resilience as a human.
Sure. So Reiki is a Japanese form of energy healing. I'm sure there are some people who, when I say that, they're like, totally, I get it. And then others are like, huh, what? So kind of a tangible way to understand this concept that we have energy centers that can be drained or out of balance. If you've ever been in a crowded place, and I know it's been a while since we've been in crowded places, right? But if you've ever been somewhere and you get that feeling like someone's looking at me, right? Or something has penetrated my energy field. You're not feeling anything physically, no one's saying anything, but you can kind of sense the energy. That, I think, is something that most, if not everybody, can relate to, and that we are energetic beings, right? So in Reiki healing, it can take a lot of different forms and intentions, but kind of it can help us re-energize. And there are different energy centers in our body. There are the 7 main chakras, if that language is familiar to anybody, and there are sort of different intentions behind each of the chakras, right? So like I mentioned, the heart chakra is about love and connection, opening, receiving. We've got chakras about connection with our spirituality and our intuition, connection with our basic needs and survival, our creativity. So receiving Reiki can be a good way to, if you're feeling drained, or if you're feeling out of balance, or you're feeling just like depleted of energy, to tap into those centers. So I certainly use it with, of course, my Reiki clients, but I also use Reiki just to center myself, to check in with my own energy, to replenish my own energy, as well as with spaces. So I don't know if you've ever walked into a space and you can just kind of feel like, oh, there's good energy in here. There's good vibes, in here, right? Yeah. Like that's another that's getting it out in our vernacular, right? We get the good vibes. So
sure. Vibes
are energy. So also using Reiki, even if my clients aren't interested in Reiki, I'm still using Reiki with them, right? I'm sending them Reiki energy. I'm setting the environment. I'm centering myself with some Reiki energy.
That's wonderful. Cool. So we've learned a little bit about breath work. We've also learned a little bit about Reiki. Now, these are two physical modalities, right, that allow us to feel more at center, to allow us to feel like, as far as that rubber band has stretched, we always can kind of come back. I want to maybe go to the second question here, which is resilience as it pertains to how you instill or you coach resilience with your clients. And maybe this is more of the mental side of resilience. What are some of the things that we can think about, or some of the key principles or foundations of building resilience as a human being?
Sure. So a few things that come to mind right away. I do a lot of like positive psychology and reframing with clients.
I love that.
So
Let's
I
talk
have,
about that.
yeah, a lot of my clients, and I think just a lot of folks, like we have these negative thought patterns, right? We are our biggest self, biggest critic. So some practices that I like to share with clients are, take those negative self statements that you might be saying, and would you ever say them to somebody else? Would you ever say them to your colleague, to your partner? What if your boss said that phrase to you, right? That we would be like, don't talk to me like that. Also our perspective. So some of this negative self-talk, reframing that and letting some of that go.
Yep.
But then perspective on situations. So if we're encountering a challenge and our perspective is one of pessimism, if we're feeling helpless, right? So kind of re-empowering and taking a new perspective and reframing the situation. There is a fine line. It's not the same as, we definitely are not invalidating any emotions or taking a sunshine and rainbows approach, right? But we're using our strength of mind body to shift, adapt, and create a new perspective.
That's interesting. And I want to come back to just that point. I want to add, though, because you talked about the benefits of positive psychology. And I will never forget an exercise that a dear friend and a coach of mine by the name of Brian Reeves took me through a couple months ago. And he had me take a piece of paper and split it down the middle. And my job was on the left-hand side to write down all of the negative thoughts that go through my mind on a day-to-day basis. Like I had to get in my mind, and if my mind had a voice, I needed to write down all of the negative, self-talk and negative thoughts that go through my brain. And we had a very dedicated, 5 minutes to do that. And I couldn't write fast enough. I mean, I was like both sides of the paper. I mean, just. And then he had me spend 5 minutes writing down all of the positive, self-talk and messages that go through my mind on a day-to-day basis. And it was so difficult. And I know that so many of us are challenged with this. And when you acknowledge just the hyper thread of, negativity that kind of goes through your head, you wonder why sometimes, and I'll go back to the rubber band analogy, you wonder why sometimes we walk around so stretched all day, right? Because that tension comes not just from our external factors and people and environment around us, but most of it comes from within, correct?
Yes. Right. Yeah. I think that's such a good example and a great exercise to start with. And I have a lot of clients who, when we start talking about some of this stuff, like you said, it's like the negative is so long and so clear. Like, how do I even begin to unpack it? So I don't know that the goal immediately has to be get rid of those negative thoughts, because if we've been practicing it for 20, 30, 40 years, like that's going to be real hard to make the shift.
Yep.
So a goal of what I share with clients is, if you can't mute the negative thoughts, practice making the positive ones just as loud.
Yep.
Right. So
Love
for
that.
every negative thought that comes in, I've got to have a positive one as well, until that voice can start leading the charge.
So you're touching on something that I was hoping that the conversation would go in this direction, because you and I, a couple of days ago, as we were prepping for this conversation, you brought up something that I think is so valuable, at least to me, and hopefully it is to our community. And that is the relationship between the concept of resilience, and you use the term grit. And I know so many times we can potentially mistake the two. And, I can relate to this, right? Particularly over the last several months, where times have gotten really tense, and there's been a lot of pressure in terms of like external factors. And from a business perspective, we've been really challenged in many different fronts. And as an entrepreneur and a self-motivated human, my mind immediately goes to, how can we push through this?
Right.
And I know that you challenged me to make sure I don't mistake grit for resilience. So I would love for you to touch on that a little bit, maybe the difference between the two and how we can keep those two, separate if we need to.
Right. Yeah, I think that both are super important and do get us through tough times. If our focus is only on the grit, to me, we might get through it, but then where's the coming back? So if it's only grit, right, we're pushing through, but then where are we at mentally, physically, and emotionally once that challenge is over? And do we have anything left in the tank to be resilient in order to bounce back? Or is it just I've stretched and now I have nothing left? To me, resilience is a little bit broader. I think speaking of the energy, right, if I were to use some energy words around it, to me, grit is like, it's tough, it's focused, it's that's the grind, that's the hustle, right?
Yeah.
Resilience it's softer, it's more encompassing, it's holistic. Grit to me is some of the mental toughness and that fortitude, and you got to power through. But I think if our focus is only on grit, I know I shared this term with you that resonated, that oftentimes what I see either my therapy clients talking about work or with my corporate clients is that we're kind of a culture of floating heads, right? Nose to the ground, grind it out, we're hustle. But where's the rest of ourselves, right? We do show up as whole people at work. So with resilience, it's less about that push through and suppress feelings. In order to be resilient, we actually have to tune in. We have to develop our emotional intelligence. We have to develop our ability to express and communicate our emotions, to know what we're feeling, to communicate and get support, because that's what's going to help us bounce back.
That's wonderful. Man, I almost need like 30 seconds just to process that, because it's such a, it's a little counter what I know, or counterintuitive to think that resilience is soft. You use the term soft. So I want to unpack that in a minute, but I also want to pause and I want to invite all of our panelists, all of our folks on LinkedIn to submit any questions that you have for Katie. We love questions. The chat box is open. Make sure you submit to panelists and or attendees so that we can see them. And I'll make sure that there's at least 5 or 10 minutes towards the end to answer those questions. So we welcome questions from the group, and we will reserve some time for them. I want to go back to this concept of resilience being soft. We love Brene Brown's work, and I know that's something that you and I have connected on. And my business partner Kathy is really into her work and bringing her work into the workplace. And I think she's done a tremendous job. Brene has done a tremendous job of introducing concepts like authenticity and resilience in a way that people can grab onto, both personally and professionally. Is there, and this is I'm going to steal a little bit from her work. Is there a part of resilience that includes letting go? Brene talks about, taking down the armor. And I asked this question because, recently I think we all have gotten a lesson, some maybe harder than others, in having to let go, whether that's letting go of expectations of your day-to-day, letting go of your expectations of others, letting go of certain biases maybe that you've lived with for years and years and years. So I love this, like, resilience being soft, and is part of that softness the ability to let go.
I love that. Yeah, I think so. Two things. I think if resilience being soft feels a little bit funky for everyone, I think that's because we're conditioned to think soft equals weak or soft equals bad, right?
It's the opposite of grit.
Yes.
Right?
So step one would be to start realizing soft is strong, right? And soft is needed. And we do need those components as well. And I think the only thing I would add to this question and idea of letting go would be that it includes vulnerability. And then this idea of radical acceptance, which is, I think, another way or conceptualizing this idea of letting go, that I have this radical acceptance for the things that I cannot shift. And then by letting go, that means I get to devote my time and energy and focus to the things that I can shift and adapt and change. But that all of that takes vulnerability. And that's why grit is not enough, right? We can't only have grit, because grit is not very vulnerable, right? Grit is the push through grind, which we do need sometimes.
Right.
But if our work culture or our family culture or whatever culture is only grit, we're missing a big part of that picture. We've got to be able to tap into, and of course, time and space, right? You're not going to show up to your boss as the same way that you show up to your therapist. And yet you can still be vulnerable. That's where those boundaries come in. So being able to identify and communicate your needs. Something I bring to a lot of clients is that we often conflate thoughts and feelings, right? So I might say like, hey, Anthony, how do you feel about that? Well, it's so there's just too much on my plate. I have so much going on. There's too much to do. That's a thought. You might be feeling overwhelmed, anxious, afraid, worried. So part of that, I think also is being able to widen our emotional vocabulary, good, fine, okay. Those aren't feelings. And yet that's usually what we say. How you feeling? Good. How are you?
Yeah.
So being able to identify those emotions in order to then let go and practice some acceptance.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Gosh, there's so much to unpack there. I want to bring it maybe to our third and final theme, which is how has resilience changed for either you or for your community, your clients over the course of the last several months? How has it shown up, and how have you been able to shed light on resilience as a tool for folks in these times?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is it's shown me clinically kind of where my clients are in terms of their resilience. And what I've been noticing this past week with everything going on, as well as since COVID has transitioned, that it's my clients. So one of my specialties is addiction and recovery. And what I have been, and I mean, they are just walking examples of resilience, right? But since COVID hit, really the clients who are in recovery, who have an addiction history, the clients who are the most anxious, those are the clients that I was seeing the most resilient, like their resilience is really shining through because they have been doing the work. They have been pushed to the point, they have been challenged, they have experienced trauma and have already bounced back and then been stretched and bounced back. So for them, it's like, yeah, I know this game, right? I know how to practice. I know what my self-care techniques are. I know how to, and not to say it's been a breeze, right? But they're in that work. Whereas maybe folks who haven't been challenged so much, who have kind of been sitting pretty and, nothing wrong with that, right? But they're kind of, it's a bumpier ride and they're having a harder time adjusting and adapting because they haven't had to before.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I am, I'm keeping an eye on the chat box here, and there's a question that I think will segue really nicely into a question that I've had throughout all of this. As you know, much of our community is in the corporate world, and I love these conversations. And hopefully, we are all part of a culture that is open to these conversations in the workplace. But we also know that our workplace feels a little bit different than our personal space, right? And so there's a question in the chat box around how do you bring a concept like resilience into the workplace as a leader? If I'm a leader of a team or an organization, how could I potentially introduce that? And I do have the visual that I think you might refer to. So if you are going to refer to it, I can definitely pull it up.
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, in preparation for this and trying to take such a large concept and distill it into some concrete things I can share with you all. I came up with some journal prompts for self-reflection for your personal and professional growth. And I also think that this would be a great exercise to do with your team, to maybe all take these prompts, do them individually, and come together and discuss. So particularly the one on the right, just going through some prompts of what is most draining. And it's going to be different things, right? So maybe there's something that kind of happens at work where the whole team feels like, yeah, we hate when this happens. But really getting to know your employees individually in terms of what does drain them, what depletes them, what connects them, what's their purpose, what is their individual why, right? Mission statements are great, and we each have our own individual purpose, and purpose and meaning has a big role in resilience, right? If we feel like we can be connected to each other, to our higher purpose, that's going to help us with the coming back. So knowing your employees individually in terms of what's draining them, what fills them up, how is each individual at work taking responsibility for the atmosphere that's created? Right? Are we entering in eye rolling with sarcastic comments? Is there a culture that sort of normalizes the F-its is what I call it, right? So, or are we contributing to the positive, resilient atmosphere? What emotional needs are not getting met at work? That's, I think, a perfectly acceptable question to ask, right? And like I said, it's not going to be the same as if their therapist was asking them, but
right.
Are they feeling disconnected? Are they feeling isolated? How can those needs be met? And how can we increase communication about those needs? And then incorporating some mind body self-care. So are you encouraging breaks? Are you encouraging breath breaks? I saw a tweet, again, I'm not citing my sources well here, but when all of this sort of started with COVID, and it said, you're not working from home. You're at home during a crisis trying to work. So are we switching to this online world and just expecting the same levels of productivity? Are we putting too high of expectations, or are we encouraging some mind body adjustments and realizing that this is not the same as if we were operating virtually in the past? We are in several public health crises right now.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope that those are helpful.
No, this is great. Are these, I'm curious, these are questions that I would love to spend some time with myself, right? And I think that's the power of journaling. Are these questions that as a leader, we might also send to our team to get a little bit of their, feedback? Of course, if they're willing to share, I think a couple of these questions would be great to answer as a team. Particularly about the atmosphere and the way that we're showing up. Is that something you'd suggest also working on as a team?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if people could take it individually so that they've got some time to think through, and then either coming together and discussing their responses, or maybe like, ooh, this is a sticking point for my team or our work culture, and maybe you just pick one that really resonates for everybody and take a deep dive. Or I would highly recommend some individual and then some group, and even at home, do it with your partner, do it with your family, do it with your kids.
Sometimes it is not until we actually ask the questions verbatim that that it has the impact that we do. I mean, you asked the question about just the atmosphere and how are we collectively contributing to a specific atmosphere. I mean, that hits, right? And I think asking that question, and to your point, the power of sitting with these questions at a time today where we are so distracted is really important. And for those of you who are part of the Zoom, and those of you who are tuning in, we will send these 2 worksheets out to everybody who has registered for this episode via email, so that you all have them to either work on individually or as a team. So Katie, thank you for contributing that. I think that'll be a great tool for everyone. We've got a couple of other questions here. And I just love this. Everybody's asking about Reiki. You knew that was going to happen, right?
Yes, I love it.
Because again, I think if meditation was first and breathwork kind of followed it, and this is not at all linear, but I think in terms of making it to mainstream, Reiki is close behind. And I have a few friends, practitioners that are just really, really into it. And we've got a couple questions around Reiki. So the first one, let's see. The first one with Reiki is, how can we start to learn more on Reiki techniques and how to start? You know, similar to how Headspace makes meditation approachable, is there a place that we can start with Reiki, or even a tool or a resource?
Sure. I'm happy to create some resources and send out. If you
Okay.
are just doing some Googling, you can certainly find some. There's plenty of practitioners on Instagram and social media, plenty of books about it. I am remembering one point about Reiki that I don't know if there are any questions about this, but might be helpful for folks to know. Anybody can practice Reiki. So it's tapping into universal, sometimes called source energy. A misconception oftentimes is that the practitioner is like giving of their energy. The practitioner is a conduit for this universal energy, which means anybody and everybody. Kids can learn how to practice Reiki. Non-clinical folks can learn Reiki. So yeah, doing some, if Google Reiki origins, and you'll find plenty of articles and resources. And then as far as learning to practice it yourself, I know plenty of practitioners. I don't know if there are any, because it's typically in person. So I don't know if there are any trainings going on now. But you can,
we'll point them to you, and at the end of the episode, we'll make sure that your information is available, because I think you are a great place to start. And something that I learned today, and actually I am going to go to Google to learn a little bit more about this, but what I learned today is that you don't necessarily need, I think having a good Reiki practitioner is a great start, but you don't necessarily need an assisted practitioner at all times in order to tap into your energy sources, correct?
Totally.
Yep. Awesome. Along those lines, and I love this question from someone very special out there. So thank you for submitting it. People seem really depleted right now, especially many leaders I've talked with. What can they do to restore or recover?
Great question, and agreed. I think depleted is such a good word to kind of describe everybody's mind, body, and energy right now. So I think where I would start is a pause and evaluate. So I think that many workplaces, many leaders oftentimes thrive in this fight, flight, everything's urgent, putting out fires. Just because we are comfortable in that doesn't mean that it's healthy for us. Right. So I do think that everything going on has kind of highlighted that, maybe I was operating on autopilot, but there's no foundation there. So I really do think that it's time for a pause, reevaluating boundaries. So these are not just emotional boundaries, but looking at your time boundaries. Are you and your employees sticking to these? This is when I work, and when I'm not working, I'm not working. Digital boundaries. Social media had been a casual place to scroll and have some fun distraction. That's not the case right now. So we need to be setting intentional how we're entering and exiting those spaces. And tapping into the body, right? Like we need some mind body healing. So I would just say the pause, and then evaluate what strategies are no longer serving you, and what do you need to start doing to incorporate more fulfillment, more nurturing.
Yep. And as leaders, it's also about giving our people that permission, maybe not necessarily creating that space for them, but giving them permission to create that space for themselves.
Yes. Yeah. And sort of, especially if you're a leader who really does care about your people, that means you're feeling that stress, right? So you're feeling the stress from above, from outside, and then also from your employees. So the more you can model that and model boundary setting, encourage people to take their breaks, give permission for them to evaluate their self-care and mind-body practices as they're healing and recuperating, that's also going to help you as a leader feel more settled and grounded.
That's wonderful. Wow, so much covered today. Really, really, really appreciate your insights, Katie. As I told you at the beginning of the episode, this could go in a million different directions.
Yeah.
But at the center of this discussion, I think was some really, really solid insight and unpacking of the term resilience. One of the things that you and I talked about in prep was uh, we would be doing a disjustice to try to define the term resilience because there's so much involved in it, right?
Right.
But the fact that resilience I think, is very quickly becoming less and less a concept and a theory. And now it's becoming almost a key ingredient, especially today, in order for us to navigate day to day to day. This information and the insight that you shared today was really, really valuable. And I want to thank you for your time and for your energy today, Katie. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Where can our folks find you if they've got more questions about Reiki as I'm scrolling through?
Yeah.
Where can they reach out and find you?
Sure. So my website is my name, katie-bellamy.com. And I'm also on Instagram at Katie Bellamy Therapy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. Thank you for your time. We also want to thank everybody who has joined today's discussion. We want to thank those who have submitted their very thoughtful questions. And if we didn't get to your question, we'll make sure that we follow up with Katie via email. We also want to share that the discussion continues this month. We are so excited to keep resilience at the center of the table because there is so much to explore about this concept and how we can leverage it as leaders and as humans. Next week, we have an absolute favorite of ours in Tim Jones joining us to the table. Tim is a community leader. He's an organizer of people, and he absolutely adores and loves and uses resilience on a day-to-day basis. So we're really excited to have Tim next week, Thursday. We are here live every Thursday at 3 o'clock. You can register for these events at thoughtium.com/live. And we look forward to serving up these topics and these insights on a week-to-week basis. So Katie, again, thank you. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the afternoon. So long.